Before these words settle in, I want you to understand what you are hearing. This is not simply someone talking about God from a distance. It is a message for this particular moment, for the place you are standing in right now. The one who knew you before you had a name is drawing your attention to something already beginning to move in your direction. Chosen one. Sit down for a moment, wherever you are, and let your body become still. Let your shoulders loosen and your hands rest open, because some things cannot be received while every part of you is still bracing for what comes next. You have spent years being taught to chase, control, and prepare for disappointment. But what is approaching you does not need to be forced into existence. It needs room to arrive. So breathe, settle into this moment, and listen to what your heart may have been waiting to hear. You have carried more than the circumstances themselves. You have carried the private question of whether all this waiting meant something, whether the prayers whispered in quiet rooms were reaching anywhere, whether those mornings when you kept going without seeing a reason were worth the effort. I have seen those moments, including the ones nobody else knew about. And I need you to know that those seasons were not empty, even when they felt that way. You did not arrive here by accident. Something has been guiding you toward this moment, and there is a reason these words are meeting you now. What is beginning to move toward your life will ask you to make room for it, because it may not fit neatly inside the version of your future you have been carrying. You have been preparing to receive something significant, even during the seasons when all you could see was delay. There is a feeling rising in you that you have struggled to explain. It began quietly, almost easy to dismiss, and lately it has carried a deeper urgency that your circumstances cannot quite account for. You sense that something has shifted around your life, like the air changing before rain, or a room becoming strangely quiet just before someone enters, and you have wondered whether that inner knowing is faith or simply another part of you hoping for something good. Listen closely, because this is where you need discernment. What you have been sensing does not need to be turned into fantasy, and it does not need to be dismissed simply because you cannot prove it yet. Something in you has recognized movement before your circumstances have given you language for it. You may have noticed it especially in your prayers, because somewhere along the way you stopped asking with the same urgency and began resting differently. For a while you may have wondered whether you were losing your faith, or whether exhaustion had simply made you stop asking. But perhaps what changed was deeper than that. You were learning to release your grip, and there is a difference between giving up and finally becoming quiet enough to receive. An open hand can feel vulnerable after years of holding tightly, but it is still the hand that can receive what is being placed into it. Some of you have also found yourself stepping away from people during this season. You may have felt guilty about it, questioning whether you were becoming distant or whether something inside you had changed in a way you could not explain. But sometimes a quieter life is not evidence that you have lost your way. Sometimes it is where you begin to hear yourself clearly again. There is a difference between loneliness and being set apart, and the difference is often understood only after you have lived through the silence. The people around you may no longer fit the person you are becoming, and that can hurt even when the separation is necessary. You are learning that belonging is not simply about having people nearby. It is also about being able to breathe, speak honestly, and remain yourself in their presence. Type 7777. If something in you recognizes this, because that quiet pulling away may have been part of your preparation, and the season of separation may be closer to its purpose than you realize. And for others, the experience has been stranger still. You feel a deep peace in places where grief should be, and you cannot always explain what you are mourning. Perhaps you are grieving an older version of your life, not because everything about it was good, but because it was familiar. Sometimes what hurts most about leaving an old season is not the life itself, but the fact that you already knew how to live inside it. There is grief in every ending, even the endings you once prayed would come. I do not want you to rush past that grief or turn it into something you have to explain away, because part of you is still saying goodbye to what became familiar. What is closing is not your whole story. It is a chapter that could no longer hold the person you have been becoming, and the chapter ahead is not simply a polished version of what came before it. carries a different shape, a different kind of room for your life. Some of you have also been having dreams that stay with you long after you wake. They may not have been frightening at all. They may have left you with a strange stillness in your chest, something you could feel clearly but could barely put into words. You may have kept them private because you wondered how they would sound if you said them aloud, or because you were afraid someone would dismiss what felt deeply personal to you. Hold them gently rather than rushing to explain them, because sometimes what reaches you in the quiet of night gives you a glimpse of what your waking life has not yet learned how to recognize. And then there is the waiting itself. Some of you have lived inside this season for so long that it has become difficult to remember who you were before waiting became part of your identity, before you learned to measure your days by what had still not happened. But what is changing is deeper than whatever eventually arrives. It is also the person who will be standing there when it does. The waiting was shaping what was being prepared for you. But it was also quietly shaping you. Look at the pattern you've been living through, the people and places that gradually stopped fitting the way your prayers became quieter, the dreams that stayed with you, the grief you could not attach to one single thing, and that strange peace that sometimes appeared without an obvious reason. None of these moments needs to become a puzzle you desperately solve tonight, but taken together, they reveal that something inside you has been changing. And perhaps that is why you feel as though you are standing closer to a threshold than you were before. And you are still here. You have been listening, even after all the times you have heard something that stirred your hope, and then watched the months pass. That matters because there is a part of you that recognizes something in this message, even while another part remains careful. You have learned to protect your heart, and I understand why. Many of you are carrying two feelings at once. One says that something significant may be approaching, that your life feels close to a shift you cannot yet see, while the other quietly whispers, "Be careful, you have felt this before." You remember the times you thought something was finally changing, only to watch another season pass, and now you let yourself hope with one hand, while keeping the other hand close enough to pull your heart back if disappointment comes. So I want to speak gently to that guarded part of you. The things you sensed before were not necessarily meaningless, simply because they unfolded differently than you imagined. You may have recognized movement without knowing what form that movement would take, and sometimes we mistake the shape we pictured for the promise itself. What feels different now is not necessarily louder or more dramatic. It is quieter, steadier, less like desperate hope, and more like a knowing you can sit with without having to convince yourself. Some of you have felt lately that something is shifting beyond what you can see. Not simply the comfort of feeling cared for, but a deeper sense that pieces are moving into place, that circumstances are rearranging in ways you cannot yet trace, that conversations may be happening before you ever hear about them. You cannot see the whole picture from where you are standing, and that is part of what makes this season difficult. The outside of your life may still look almost unchanged, while something inside you has already begun to move. To the people around you, there may be little evidence that anything is different. Yet you feel a pressure that does not feel like pain, a weight that somehow carries anticipation rather than defeat. The delay is not necessarily a sign that nothing is happening. Some things take time because they are being formed with care. What is being prepared for you requires a version of you capable of carrying it without losing yourself inside the very thing you once begged for. That formation is reaching a different point now. The process is nearing completion, and when what has been prepared finally enters your life, you may understand something that is difficult to see from inside the waiting. The significance will not come only from what arrives, it will also come from the person you have become while waiting for it. What is being entrusted to you and the person receiving it have been growing toward one another. I waited to release this in your direction, because there were things you needed to learn before you could hold them, without allowing them to define your worth. You'll become more capable of carrying what once might have overwhelmed you, and that change may be one of the greatest parts of what this season has produced. The blessing and the person receiving it have been prepared together. Think of Mary, By every outward measure she was young and ordinary, living a life that gave no visible indication of what was about to be asked of her. She had no position that could explain the assignment, no public credentials that could make it seem reasonable, and no carefully constructed plan that told her exactly what would happen next. Then the message came, carrying something far beyond what her circumstances could have prepared her to expect. She was told that she had found favor, and that she would carry something that had never been carried before. And what stands out about her response is that she did not begin by proving she was qualified, demanding a complete explanation, or asking for a detailed map of everything that would follow. She yielded. Her answer was essentially, "Let it be to me as you have said." And in that surrender, something impossible began taking shape within her. And I want you to notice something important about the way that story unfolded. Mary was not given a perfect life first, and then invited into something sacred once she had finally proven she was ready. The announcement came first, and the transformation unfolded inside the yes that followed. That matters for you, because you may have spent years believing you needed to become more worthy, more disciplined, more healed, or more certain before you could be trusted with what you were called toward. But that is not how this kind of formation works. What has been moving toward you was never dependent on you becoming flawless beforehand. Much of your preparation has been happening while you were already walking through the calling. Every time you surrendered instead of trying to control the outcome. Every time you remained faithful in a place where nobody applauded you. Every time you chose prayer over manipulation, something inside you was being strengthened. You probably could not see it while it was happening, because real formation rarely announces itself in the moment. I want you to look back at some of those difficult seasons differently now, because you deserve to understand what they were shaping in you. In the loneliness, you were learning how to stand securely within yourself, instead of needing another person to tell you that you belonged. So when the right people enter your life, you can love them without making them responsible for your identity. You can welcome connection with open hands, because you have learned how to remain rooted, even when the room around you changes. In rejection, you are learning discernment. You are being taught to recognize the difference between something that feels familiar and something that is actually aligned with the person you are becoming. In seasons when money felt tight, you were learning that your worth could never be measured by what you could produce or control. And in the long stretches when answers seemed delayed, you were learning how to trust a timing you could not manage, even when you had no explanation for why it was taking so long. Those limitations became places where something in you could grow. The closed doors taught you things the open ones could not have taught you. And the curriculum was never meant to be punishment. It was preparation. There were lessons you could only learn when your usual ways of securing certainty stopped working, when you had to discover what remained inside you after the things you leaned on were taken away. Think about gold in a fire. The heat does not mean the gold has been rejected or deemed worthless. The very opposite is true. It is placed into the fire because something valuable is there, something worth refining until what is essential becomes easier to see. So, perhaps the difficulty you have walked through was never proof that something was fundamentally wrong with you. Perhaps some of the hardest seasons were revealing what could remain steady in you when everything around you felt uncertain. That old thought has followed you for a long time, the thought that life would have been easier if you had simply been more faithful, more spiritual, more aligned, more deserving. I want you to loosen your grip on that belief. The fire is not proof that you have been forgotten, and the struggle is not a verdict on your worth. Sometimes the very place that made you question yourself was also the place where something durable was being formed. Take one honest breath here, simply because you have been carrying enough for long enough. You do not need to solve the future in this moment, and you do not need to figure out what your next move will be before you are allowed to rest. Let these words reach the part of you that has been working so hard to understand everything. Type, "I see it," if something inside you shifted while listening, and let those words mark the moment you recognize what this season has been shaping in you. Come back with me to the formation for a moment, because there is something essential about what has been happening in you that has not yet been fully named. All those seasons, the closed doors, the delays, the moments when you wondered whether anything was changing. We're expanding your ability to carry what is coming without losing yourself inside it. Chosen one, you are not behind, and you did not somehow miss the moment you were supposed to arrive. You have been becoming the person this next season requires, and that formation has reached its completion. There is something about the way I provide that you have been taught to misunderstand. You have been tempted to measure what is coming by how much you endured, how faithful you were, or how well you performed spiritually, as though blessing were a salary earned through suffering. Release that way of thinking, because what is coming toward you is not a paycheck for your pain, and it is not a reward calculated from your spiritual resume. A gift reflects the generosity of the giver, and what I give is never limited by the smallness of what you believe you deserve. I want you to notice 3 things that are converging around your life now. Not because every breakthrough follows a pattern of 3, but because these particular movements have been developing at the same time. The first has to do with people, with relationships that belong to the season ahead of you rather than the one you have been leaving behind. Some of these people may arrive in ways you never expected, and you may recognize them less by excitement than by the strange peace that settles over you when they are near. There may already have been a meeting like this, a conversation that seemed ordinary on the surface, but left something inside you quietly saying, "Pay attention." That recognition matters, because the people meant for your next season may not resemble the people you once thought you needed. Notice who allows you to breathe, who does not make you perform for belonging, and who brings a sense of peace instead of pressure when they enter your world. You'll begin to understand that some relationships are recognized in the spirit long before the mind knows what to call them. The second convergence concerns provision, especially the kind you have stopped watching for because you became tired of staring at the same closed door. Sometimes I allow your attention to move away from what you have been asking for, so you can finally notice what was being prepared somewhere outside your field of vision. The provision connected to your next season does not require you to chase it into existence or exhaust yourself trying to force it open. Your part is to remain receptive enough to recognize what arrives, and you have become far more open than you realize. The third is connected to something you once lost, something you eventually had to mourn and place down because carrying the hope of it became too painful. You may have told yourself that you had accepted the loss, and perhaps you truly have. But making peace with something does not always mean its story has reached its final form. There are things that could not have been returned to the version of you who first lost them, because you had not yet become the person capable of holding them differently. So when restoration comes, do not expect it to look exactly like what you remember. What returns may carry the same essence, but it may arrive with greater maturity, greater stability, and a shape that fits the person you are now. The loss changed you, and that matters because some things are restored only after the hands receiving them had learned how to hold them without fear. What you thought was the end of that chapter may have simply been the point where you stopped trying to write the ending yourself. And there is one more thing being established in you that is difficult to describe as a blessing. It is authority, but not the kind that comes from a title, a platform, or being recognized by other people. It is the quiet weight that develops in someone who has walked through the fire and allowed the experience to make them deeper rather than harder. You may begin to notice it in small ways, the way your words carry further than they used to, the way people become still when you speak, the way you no longer need to prove what you know because something in your presence already communicates it. That is part of what your formation has produced. You are not becoming louder, you are becoming steadier, and there is a difference. What has been built inside you through every season of waiting is beginning to move through your voice, your choices, and the way you enter a room. Chosen one, you may not feel powerful when this begins, and that may be one of the clearest signs that it is real, because true spiritual weight does not always announce itself to the person carrying it. Gently press the like button if you feel this message may need to reach someone else who has been sitting in a long silence and quietly wondering whether anything is about to change. Let it find the person who has learned to expect disappointment, the person who still hopes but has become careful with that hope, the person who needs a reminder that silence can hold movement even when there is nothing visible to prove it yet. And before we go any further, I want you to let one grounded truth settle inside you. You have been in a season of intentional formation. The waiting carried purpose. The preparation has brought you to a different capacity, and the person standing here now is not the same person who entered that season. You may still have questions, and you may not know exactly how everything will unfold, but you do not have to solve the entire future tonight in order to receive what is already beginning to meet you. The deepest shift may simply be this. You are learning that your life was never meant to be lived entirely through striving, proving, and holding everything together with clenched hands. There is a part of you that has been learning how to receive again, slowly and almost quietly, after years of being trained to calculate every outcome and prepare for every disappointment. You may notice it in the way you pray now, in the way you respond to uncertainty, or in the strange peace that sometimes arrives before you have any visible reason for it. That openness is part of the formation too, because when what has been prepared finally reaches you, you will need more than the desire to receive it. You will need the capacity to remain yourself while holding it. And the one who is learning to receive is you. The one whose formation has reached its appointed place. The one whose hands are finally beginning to open after years of holding everything so tightly. There is a part of you that still remembers what it felt like to live in constant striving, always calculating, proving, anticipating, and preparing yourself for whatever might go wrong. You learned how to reach for things while keeping part of yourself guarded, because somewhere along the way, receiving became harder than giving, and hoping became more vulnerable than working. But something in you has been changing, quietly and steadily, and you are beginning to remember that you were created for more than survival. There is a state within you where you can receive without immediately questioning whether you are allowed to have what has arrived. It is the posture of the child who can accept a gift without first asking what they did to deserve it, how long it will last, or what they will owe in return. That innocence is not weakness, and it does not mean you stop being discerning. It means you stop making every good thing prove its worth before you let yourself experience it. For so long the world trained you to clench your hands around life, and now you are being invited to loosen them, because the deeper issue has never been that you are incapable of receiving. It is that you have spent enough time protecting yourself that receiving can feel strangely unsafe. You may say yes with your words, while something inside you quietly steps backward, already preparing an explanation for why the blessing probably belongs to someone else. You may recognize an opening and immediately search for the reason it will close, hear encouragement, and wonder whether it was really meant for you, or feel more comfortable being the person who gives everything away than the person who finally allows something beautiful to reach them. That pattern did not appear from nowhere. There may have been a season when needing something felt dangerous, when wanting too much brought disappointment, or when taking up the space you naturally occupied was met with rejection, criticism, or silence. So you learned to become smaller before life could make you feel small, to expect less before someone else could take something away, and to keep one part of your heart standing outside the door, even when the rest of you desperately wanted to enter. That strategy may have protected you once, chosen one, but the same protection can eventually become the very thing that keeps you from fully inhabiting the life you have grown into. You do not have to condemn that older version of yourself for learning how to survive. She was responding to what she knew, with the tools she had at the time. But you are allowed to recognize that those tools have served their purpose, and you are allowed to put them down gently. You can stop shrinking yourself before anything has even asked you to shrink. Stop adding a quiet disclaimer to every promise, and stop assuming that every good thing must eventually be taken away simply because you have experienced loss before. You are allowed to receive. You are allowed to let something good reach you without immediately searching for the hidden cost. You are allowed to occupy the full size of the life you have been growing toward. And you are allowed to believe that when a promise is spoken over your life, it can actually include you. You do not have to remain smaller than your calling, simply because smallness once made you feel safer. And you do not have to apologize for becoming someone who can finally hold what once would have overwhelmed you. Take a real breath here and let that settle somewhere deeper than your thoughts. You do not have to force yourself into complete certainty, and you do not have to become fearless before you are worthy of receiving. Just make a little room inside yourself for the possibility that the good thing you have been waiting for does not need to be pushed away simply because it feels unfamiliar. Type the words "I receive" if something in you recognizes that truth, and let those words mark the moment you begin loosening your grip on the protection you no longer need. In the same way, there is still something important I want you to understand about who you are, beneath the circumstances, beneath the years of endurance, and beneath the version of yourself you learn to present in order to belong. You are a chosen one, but I do not want that identity to become another performance you feel pressured to live up to. There is something quieter underneath it, something you have probably sensed since you were young, without always having language for it. You carry light into places that have forgotten what light feels like. You have probably noticed it in ways that seem too ordinary to call significant. You leave certain conversations feeling different from the way you entered them, and sometimes the other person does too, even when you barely said anything remarkable. You notice possibilities in people before they can see those possibilities for themselves, and people sometimes find themselves telling you things they had not planned to say, because something about your presence makes honesty feel safer. You may have wondered why people seem to find you during their hardest moments, even when you never invited that role. That is more than simply being the person who gives good advice. There is a particular way you perceive what is happening beneath the surface, a sensitivity to what remains unspoken, and a way of putting language to feelings that other people have carried without knowing how to name them. You hear what is underneath the words. You notice the change in someone's voice, the pause before they answer, the thing they almost say and then swallow back. And often, before you understand why, you already know what needs to be brought into the light. That is part of what has been formed in you through every season you thought was simply taking something from you. The loneliness taught you to hear yourself. The rejection taught you to discern. The waiting taught you to remain present when there was no immediate reward. And the losses taught you how to carry tenderness without letting it destroy you. You thought those seasons were only asking you to endure, but they were also shaping the way you would one day enter a room, meet a person, speak a word, and leave something lighter than you found it. You are the light bearer, not because you have perfected yourself, and not because every part of your life has become easy to understand. You carry light because you have known darkness closely enough to recognize what people need when they are standing inside it. And as you step into what has been forming around you, you may begin to realize that the very sensitivity you once considered a burden was teaching you how to see what others could not yet see in themselves. There are things you say when you finally stop guarding yourself that reach people in places they have struggled to name. Sometimes you give words to a grief someone has carried quietly for years, or you say something simple that helps another person recognize hope, where they had only felt confusion. That is more than having a way with words. It is part of what you have been given to carry, and your voice was never meant to belong only to you. When you silence yourself because you feel too small, too uncertain, or somehow unqualified to speak, there are people who may go without the very words they needed to hear. You are also a cycle breaker, chosen one. There are patterns that moved through generations before you, patterns that became so familiar that people stopped questioning them. And something in you has reached the point where you can finally look at one of those patterns and quietly say, "It ends here." You did not choose every circumstance that placed you at this particular intersection of family, history, place, and time, but you can choose what continues through you. That does not have to feel like a burden placed on your shoulders. It can become an honor that fits your life with remarkable precision. And I want you to understand that this is not about repeating affirmations until you can convince yourself that you are important. I am describing what has already been developing in you. Your assignment is not something you manufacture through effort, and what is coming toward you is not a prize for having carried that assignment perfectly. It is part of what equips you to carry what you have been called to carry with greater fullness. You have been becoming capable of holding more without abandoning yourself in the process. Before we close, I want you to do something quietly with me. In your mind, step into the life from the other side of this waiting. not as someone pretending everything has already happened, but as the version of you who has finally learned what it feels like to receive. Notice the way your body feels when you no longer have to brace for disappointment, when your hands are open and your eyes are settled, when silence feels spacious instead of threatening. You still look like yourself, and you still sound like yourself, but there is something different inside you. Less striving, less urgency, and more trust in what has already been formed. That version of you is not a fantasy you have to force yourself to become overnight. It is a glimpse of what these seasons have been moving toward. And perhaps the distance between you and that version has become smaller than you realize. Chosen one, I want to leave you with something deeper than a summary or another instruction. I want you to hear this as personally as I can say it. I see you, including the part of you that appears only when no one else is watching. I see the person who gets tired and keeps going anyway, the person who carries things that are difficult to explain without making them sound smaller than they really are. I see the mornings when continuing required more from you than anyone around you understood, the quiet prayers, the unanswered questions, and the moments when you wondered whether your faith was still alive because you had become too tired to express it the way you once did. None of that disappeared simply because no one else witnessed it, and you were never invisible in those moments. There were seasons when being unseen protected something in you that was still becoming. There were things you could not have carried safely under the kind of attention you once thought you wanted. And there were parts of your life that needed room to grow before they could be exposed to everyone around you. Your obscurity had a purpose. Your waiting had a purpose. And even the years that felt strangely quiet were shaping something beneath the surface that you could not yet measure. Now I speak this over you because the time has come for you to receive it. You were made for this moment, not for some easier version of your life, with a cleaner history or fewer scars, but for this exact place, with everything you have carried, everything you have survived, everything you have prayed through, and everything you refuse to completely abandon. The person you are today is not an accident on the way to becoming someone else. This particular version of you is the one these years were preparing. You are not late. You are not somehow standing outside the timing of your own life. You are here at a point that required the wisdom, discernment, tenderness, and strength you could only have gained by walking through what you have already walked through. That does not mean every painful thing was good, and it does not mean every loss needed to happen exactly as it did. It means you have the right to recognize what those experiences built in you without having to romanticize the pain itself. So begin releasing what you are ready to release. Release the weight of the doors that never opened, the opportunities that almost became something, the relationships that nearly stayed, and the seasons when you thought you were finally arriving only to discover another stretch of waiting. Let yourself grieve what those things cost you, and then let your hands become available again. You cannot keep gripping everything that was while fully receiving everything that is still ahead. And opening your hands does not erase the importance of what you lost. Some of the years you counted as wasted may look different when you finally see them from a greater distance. What felt like subtraction from your life may have been shaping your capacity, your discernment, your roots, and your ability to remain yourself when circumstances change. Formation does not always feel productive while you are inside it, but there comes a point when you look back and realize that the person who emerged from those years carries something the person who entered them could never have carried. That is who you have become, more rooted, more aware, more capable of recognizing what belongs to you and what does not, and more prepared to hold what comes without losing your center. And the thing you have been anticipating is not being matched to some imaginary perfect version of you. It is meeting the person you actually are now. Chosen one, this is why you can finally stop asking whether you are enough for what is ahead, and begin asking whether you are willing to receive it with the hands you have spent so long learning to open. Type the words, "I am ready," if something inside you feels that shift, and let those words be your agreement with the one who formed you, preserved you, and carried you through seasons you once thought would never end. Then, for a moment, let everything become quiet. You do not have to reach for another answer right now. Simply allow what you have heard to settle beneath the noise, into the places inside you that have been waiting for permission to believe again. Something may have moved in you during this message before your circumstances had any chance to show you evidence of it. You may not be able to explain it yet, and you do not need to. Sometimes recognition arrives before understanding, and sometimes the first sign that something has changed is simply that an old fear no longer feels quite as convincing as it did when you began listening. And one more thing before you go, you did not stay because you had nothing else competing for your attention. Some part of you recognized yourself in these words, perhaps in a place you have rarely allowed anyone else to see. If this message gave language to a grief you have been carrying quietly, confirmed something you have sensed, but struggled to trust, or brought peace to something inside you that has been unsettled, let your light be your agreement with yourself that you received what was meant to reach you here. And if you want to remain connected to messages like this as the seasons of your life continue to unfold, stay connected. There are more words being prepared for what is coming next. What was spoken here is a doorway into something deeper, not the final word over your life. And if someone came to your mind while you were listening, someone who has been unusually quiet lately, someone who has slowly withdrawn from the people around them without really knowing how to explain it, pay attention to that. Sometimes you can sense when someone is carrying more than their words are willing to reveal. Maybe they still answer when people ask if they are okay. Maybe they still go to work, still smile, still move through ordinary days while something much heavier is happening underneath. If you feel that person in your heart right now, reach out to them in whatever simple way feels natural, because they may need to hear something they have struggled to tell themselves. What they are walking through is not meaningless, and their waiting does not make them forgotten. There is still preparation taking place, and what has been forming in them is closer to completion than they may realize. They deserve to know that, and perhaps you deserve to hear it again too, because sometimes the person who recognizes another person's silence is carrying a similar silence of their own. So when you leave this message, remember that you are not simply walking away from a few words you heard today. You are stepping out of a season that has already changed you. Chosen one, go forward as the person you have been becoming all along, with your hands open, your heart settled, and the quiet knowledge that you were made for this moment.